She sat by the window with her hands shaking, wondering if God could still see her. She had lost everything back east, but she prayed that maybe, just maybe, the West would give her a place to breathe again. Maren Felton held her small suitcase on her lap as the train rattled across the wide land. She was 27 years old, but grief had made her feel older. The rolling fields outside the window looked endless. They looked lonely too, but not in the same way her heart felt lonely. These fields were quiet and open like a deep breath. Her heart was tight and tired, like a long cry that had not stopped for months. Back east, she once had a little home above her parents' bakery. She could still smell the warm bread and sweet rolls when she closed her eyes. But the fire took it all. The bakery. The home. Her parents. Every good thing she knew. People tried to help, but the town felt full of memories she could not carry anymore. So when she saw the small newspaper ad asking for a ranch cook out west, she whispered a shaky prayer and said yes. The train swayed and Maren held onto her seat. The other passengers were quiet. Some slept, some talked softly, and some were staring out the open windows just like her. A little boy across the aisle smiled at her. She smiled back, and for a moment her chest hurt a little less. She missed simple smiles. She missed the sound of children laughing. She missed having someone to talk to in the evenings. She touched the letter in her pocket, the one from Jonas Reddick, the ranch owner who hired her. His handwriting was steady and short. He had written that he needed a cook because things had grown hard on the ranch since his wife passed away. Maren had read that part many times. She knew something about grief. She knew how it felt to walk through a quiet house and hear nothing but your own footsteps. The train whistle cried out, sharp and lonely. The sky outside grew brighter as the train climbed a small hill. Maren's eyes watered, though she blinked hard to stop it. She was not sure if she was scared or hopeful. Maybe both. But she knew she could not go back. She had nothing back there except ashes and empty rooms. She whispered a prayer, her voice soft and almost lost in the noise of the train. Lord, please guide me. I don't know what waits for me, but help me hold on. Her heart felt quiet after she prayed. Not healed. Not full. But calm enough to breathe. The train slowed as they neared the small station where she would get off. She could see the wooden platform, the horses tied near the post, and a few men waiting. One of them stood straighter than the rest. He wore a wide hat and had strong arms that showed he worked hard every day. His face was serious, but his eyes, even from a distance, looked tired. Maren wondered if that was Jonas Reddick. When the train stopped, she stood slowly, her legs a little weak. She stepped down onto the platform, feeling the dust rise around her shoes. The air was warm and smelled like pine and distant smoke. It felt different from the east. It felt honest. The tall man with the wide hat walked toward her. He removed his hat politely. Miss Felton? He asked. Maren nodded. Yes. Are you Mr. Reddick? I am, he said with a quiet voice. Welcome to Barley Creek Ranch. We're grateful you came. Maren held her suitcase a little tighter. His voice was gentle, almost careful. She felt her heart whisper something she had not felt in a long time. She did not know what the words were yet, but they felt warm. Jonas led her to the wagon and she climbed in. As the horses started to pull them down the dirt road, she looked back at the train that had carried her away from all she lost. Then she looked ahead at the long road leading to the ranch. She did not know it yet, but this road was carrying her toward something she had prayed for without even knowing how to ask. It was carrying her toward a new beginning, a new family, and a quiet healing only God could give. And with each turn of the wagon wheels, her heart began to open, just a little, to the life waiting for her at Barley Creek Ranch. She thought she was only coming to cook, but the ranch felt like a broken place waiting for someone gentle to touch it again. And without knowing it, she was that someone. The wagon rolled over the long dirt path, and Maren held onto the seat as the wheels bounced over stones. The land around her stretched far and wide. Golden grass brushed against the wind, and the sky looked so big it made her feel small. But it was not the bad kind of small. It was the kind that reminded her that God's world was bigger than her pain. Jonas Reddick did not talk much on the way. He held the reins in strong, steady hands. His hat shaded part of his face, but she could see the tiredness around his eyes. He looked like a man who woke before the sun and went to sleep long after dark. A man carrying more weight than he ever said out loud. You'll meet Sutter and Tobias soon, Jonas finally said as they neared a wooden gate. They're good men. Loud sometimes, but good. Maren smiled softly. I'm glad to hear that. He glanced at her just for a second. We haven't had a proper cook since my wife passed. His voice dropped, gentle and respectful. The men have been living on whatever we could put together. Maren nodded. Grief could make even simple things fall apart. A kitchen. A home. A family. She knew that too well. The ranch came into view and Maren's eyes widened. Barley Creek Ranch was larger than she imagined. There was a long wooden barn, a corral, a chicken coop, and a tall house with a porch that looked worn but welcoming. Smoke rose from the chimney, and the sound of cattle drifted across the yard. Two men came out of the barn as the wagon rolled to a stop. "That must be Sutter and Tobias," Jonas said. Sutter was tall with sandy hair and a grin that looked like it rarely left his face. Tobias was younger, with dark curls and kind eyes that made him look like he'd help anyone who asked. Sutter whistled. "Well, look at that. The good Lord truly answered our prayers. We finally have someone who knows what a kitchen is for." Tobias nudged him. "Be polite. Miss Felton just arrived." Maren laughed a little. "I'll do my best." Jonas climbed down and offered his hand to help her. She hesitated for a moment, then took it. His hand was warm and steady, and he helped her gently, like he was afraid she might break. Sutter and Tobias carried her bag while Jonas showed her the house. The moment she stepped inside, Maren felt her heart tighten. The kitchen was not just messy. It was forgotten. Pots were stacked in a corner, dishes were piled high, and dust covered almost everything. She swallowed quietly. Jonas looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have kept it up better." "It's all right," Maren said in a calm voice. "A kitchen can always be cleaned. It just needs time." Jonas seemed relieved by her kindness. "If there's anything you need, we'll get it." She nodded and walked further into the room. She touched the counter with her fingertips. She could almost imagine what it once looked like when Jonas's wife had worked here. She wondered if the woman had hummed while she cooked. If she had fed the cowboys with the same care Maren hoped to give. She felt a quiet sadness for the woman she never knew. Maren set her suitcase in the small room Jonas showed her upstairs. The room was simple but cozy, with a bed, a small table, and a window that looked out toward the barn. She placed her hand on the window frame and whispered a simple prayer. "Lord, please help me make this place warm again." After settling in, she walked back to the kitchen. Sutter and Tobias were waiting, eager faces ready for the miracle of a real meal. "What can we do to help?" Tobias asked. Maren smiled. "Well, we'll start with washing dishes. A lot of them." The men groaned playfully and she laughed for the first time in a long while. The sound surprised her. It felt light, like it came from somewhere she thought was gone forever. They worked together for hours. Water splashed everywhere, and Sutter joked so much that Tobias kept dropping things because he was laughing too hard. Jonas stopped by the doorway once, watching quietly. When Maren looked up and caught his eye, he gave a small, soft smile. Not a full one. Just enough to show something gentle had moved inside him. By evening, the kitchen was cleaner than it had been in years. Maren cooked a simple but warm meal: potatoes, buttered bread, and beans with herbs she brought from the east. The smell filled the house, and even Jonas looked surprised. When they sat down to eat, Sutter closed his eyes after the first bite. "If this is the first meal," he said slowly, "I believe we're all in for better days." Tobias nodded fast. "Much better." Jonas didn't say much, but he bowed his head when Maren prayed over the food. And when he lifted his eyes, they looked calmer than they had before. As night settled over Barley Creek Ranch, Maren stood outside for a moment. She watched the stars, bright and endless above her. She breathed in the cool air, and for the first time since the fire back east, she felt something change inside her. She wasn't healed yet. Not fully. But she wasn't lost anymore. And she didn't know it yet, but this ranch, these people, and this quiet western land were about to restore parts of her heart she thought were gone forever. Sometimes healing starts with simple things. A clean table. Warm bread. A gentle smile. She did not know it yet, but every small thing she touched at the ranch was slowly bringing life back into a home that had been silent for too long. Maren woke early the next morning, long before the sun rose. She listened to the quiet creaks of the house as she got dressed. The air felt cool on her skin and the wooden floor was cold under her feet. For a moment, she stood by the small window in her room and looked out at the ranch. The barn was dark and smoke had not yet lifted from the chimney. Everything was still. Everything was waiting. She whispered a soft prayer before going downstairs. Her hands were steady this morning, not shaking the way they sometimes did after dreams of the fire. She walked into the kitchen, lit a lamp, and stood there in the soft glow. The kitchen looked new again, at least compared to yesterday. Clean counters. Empty sink. Pots set in tidy rows. She pressed her hand against her chest. Felt good. Peaceful. Like she had stepped into a place God had opened for her. She set dough to rise. She peeled potatoes. She sliced onions with slow, even cuts. Her mind drifted as she worked, remembering the way her mother used to hum as she cooked in their bakery. Maren did not hum, but she breathed quietly. In and out. Steady and calm. Almost like a song. By the time the sun finally reached over the hills, the smell of warm bread filled the entire house. The door opened behind her, and she turned to see Tobias walking in with sleepy eyes and messy hair. "Miss Felton," he said, rubbing his face, "that smell could wake a man from his grave." Maren laughed as she set a loaf on the table. "Sit down, Tobias. You look like you need food before you fall over." He sat quickly, like he had been waiting for permission. Sutter came in next, holding his stomach and groaning on purpose. "I dreamed of bread last night," he said dramatically. "Thought it was the angels welcoming me to heaven." Maren shook her head with a smile. "It's just bread, Sutter." "No," he said, pointing at it. "This is hope. Real hope." Tobias nodded in agreement. "We haven't eaten anything this good in a long while." Jonas entered last, quiet as always. He removed his hat and set it near the door. He looked at the bread, the warm plates, the bright kitchen. Something softened in his expression. "Thank you," he said simply. Those two words held weight. They were not just polite words. They sounded like a man who had not had much to thank anyone for in a long time. They ate together and the table felt full. Sutter told another one of his funny stories, and Tobias nearly choked from laughing too hard. Even Jonas gave a small smile, staring down at his plate like he didn't want anyone to see the soft look on his face. When breakfast ended, Sutter and Tobias headed out to the barns. Jonas stayed behind for a moment. He stood by the doorway watching Maren as she washed a pan. "You've brought life back into this kitchen," he said. Maren looked up with gentle eyes. "It just needed care." Jonas nodded slowly. "Everything on this ranch has needed care." He didn't say more, but the pause in his voice made Maren wonder how long he had been trying to hold everything together on his own. After he left, she stepped outside to gather herbs from the small garden behind the house. It looked dry, like no one had touched it for months. Maren knelt down and began pulling weeds, her hands moving with patience. She did not mind the dirt. She liked feeling the earth. It was simple, honest, healing. As she worked, a soft wind blew across the ranch. She closed her eyes and let it wash over her. She thought of her parents, their warm smiles, their gentle hands kneading dough beside her. She wondered if they would be proud of her for coming here, for trying again, for choosing life instead of staying in her grief. A peaceful feeling settled in her chest. She took it as a small answer to her thoughts. Inside the house, she cleaned the rooms one by one. Dust lifted into the air and sunlight caught it, making tiny golden sparks float around her. The house felt lighter with every sweep of her broom, as if the walls were breathing again. Later, when she stepped outside to shake out a rug, she saw Jonas fixing a fence. His shirt sleeves were rolled up and he worked with slow, sure movements, the kind that came from years of doing the same job day after day. He looked up when he sensed her watching, and for a moment their eyes met. There was quiet understanding there. Quiet respect. Nothing more. But it warmed her heart anyway. By evening, Sutter and Tobias gathered near the porch, tired from the long day. Jonas joined them as Maren brought out a plate of fresh biscuits. "You didn't have to do that," Jonas said softly. "I wanted to," Maren replied. "It feels right." Jonas nodded again. A small, grateful gesture. As the sun sank behind the hills, Maren stood on the porch and looked out across the open land. It glowed orange and gold. A peaceful hush fell across the ranch. She breathed it in like a prayer, letting the warmth settle deep in her heart. She did not know how much healing she had brought into the ranch that day. She did not know how each small act of kindness had touched the men who lived there. She did not know how much they needed someone like her. She only knew one thing. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she belonged somewhere. And little by little, without her seeing it yet, God was stitching her heart back together in this quiet western place. She had already lost so much to one terrible night back east. So when the storm rolled in, she feared losing again. But she did not know God was about to show her that He still watched over every life on that ranch, including hers. The morning began bright and calm. The sky was soft blue, and the air felt warm as Maren stepped out to gather eggs from the chicken coop. The chickens clucked around her feet, pecking and fussing, and she laughed softly at their busy ways. It was a peaceful start to the day, the kind that made her heart feel steady. But by noon the sky had changed. The wind turned sharp, sweeping across the fields like it was searching for something. Dark clouds rolled in fast, piling over the mountains like thick blankets of shadow. By afternoon, the whole ranch looked dim as if someone had pulled a curtain over the sun. Jonas stood on the porch staring at the sky. His face grew tight. "A storm's coming," he said. "And a bad one." Sutter and Tobias rushed to saddle the horses. They had been checking fences on the eastern side of the land and needed to finish before the storm hit. Jonas grabbed his coat and hat. "We'll be back before dark," he told Maren. "Stay inside where it's safe." Maren nodded, but fear pressed gently at her heart. Storms always reminded her of the night the fire took her home. The crackle of lightning. The roar of wind. The helplessness. She forced herself to breathe slow. Jonas mounted his horse and gave her a small look, one that said he understood more than he spoke. "We'll be all right," he said quietly. Then the three men rode off into the growing dark. Maren stood on the porch long after they disappeared into the distance. The first drops of rain hit the roof like small taps, then harder like stones. Thunder rolled across the sky, deep and rumbling. The wind picked up, twisting through the trees and making the barn doors shake. She hurried inside and shut every window. The house moaned softly under the weight of the storm. The lamps flickered and the kitchen felt too big, too empty. Maren hugged her arms around herself as memories rose uninvited. Flames, shouts, smoke, the feeling of running with nothing but her mother's voice in her ears. Her breath shook. But then she remembered something else, her mother's words when storms came. "When you are afraid, kneel. Let your fear fall to the floor and let God lift your heart." So Maren knelt beside the kitchen table. The storm roared as she prayed. The wind howled. The windows rattled. But she prayed anyway, her voice trembling. "Lord, please keep them safe. Please guide them home. Please, please do not let harm come to them." She prayed for Jonas with his tired, gentle eyes. She prayed for Sutter, who filled the ranch with laughter it had starved for. She prayed for Tobias, whose kindness never seemed to run dry. She prayed until her knees hurt and her eyes burned. She prayed because she cared. More than she wanted to admit. Hours passed. The rain pushed against the roof so hard Maren feared it might break. The thunder cracked so loud it made her jump. She lit every lamp she could find, letting the warm glow fight the shadows. Then when the night was darkest she heard it. Hoofbeats. Faint at first. Then louder. Then clear. She rushed to the door and swung it open. Rain blew in at her, cold and sharp, but she did not care. Jonas's silhouette appeared first, soaked from head to toe. Behind him came Sutter and Tobias, their horses stumbling but still moving. They were alive. They were safe. Maren pressed her hands over her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Jonas slid off his horse and walked toward her. His hat dripped water and his clothes stuck to his skin, but his eyes held a relief so deep it almost broke her heart. "You prayed, didn't you?" Jonas said softly. Maren nodded, too shaken to speak. Sutter and Tobias stumbled into the house, dripping and laughing in that strange way people do when they are scared but grateful. They told stories of lightning striking near the creek, of branches falling, of nearly losing their way in the thick rain. They joked that the storm had tried its best but still couldn't beat them. Maren brought blankets. She made hot tea. She fussed over them until Sutter told her she was an angel with wet shoes. Then Jonas stepped close to her, just near enough for her to feel the warmth of him even through his soaked coat. "Thank you," he said. His voice was quiet but full. Full of relief. Full of gratitude. Full of something he did not have words for. Maren looked at him, her heart trembling in a new, soft way. "I was scared," she whispered. "I didn't want anything to happen to you." Jonas held her gaze for a long moment. There was no judgment in his eyes. No confusion. Only understanding. Only a shared feeling they both pretended not to name. "You kept this home warm until we returned," he said. "That means more than you know." The storm slowly faded through the night, but the warmth inside the ranch grew stronger. The men rested by the fire, and Maren sat nearby, her hands curled around a warm cup. Jonas sat across from her, watching the flames dance. Every so often their eyes met and neither looked away. Outside, the wind softened into a gentle sigh. Inside, something quiet and new was beginning. Maren did not know it yet, but this night had changed something. Something in the house. Something in the air. Something in her heart. God had kept the men safe. And he had opened a tiny door inside Maren, one that led toward healing she never imagined she would feel again. She came to the ranch to fix meals, not broken things. But when the old barn collapsed after the storm, she found herself helping mend more than wood. She did not know that God was also mending the people inside it. The morning after the storm was quiet in a strange way. The air was cool and still, as if the sky was tired from shouting all night. The ranch yard was full of fallen branches, muddy puddles and deep footprints from the horses. Maren stepped outside with her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders and listened to the soft sounds of the ranch waking up again. Jonas, Sutter and Tobias were already in the yard looking toward the barn. Maren could see at once that something was wrong. Part of the roof had fallen in. A whole corner leaned to the side like it was too tired to stand. Jonas rubbed his forehead. That storm did more damage than I thought. Sutter kicked at a broken board. We're lucky the horses were outside. Tobias nodded. If they were inside it could have been real bad. Maren stepped closer. Can it be fixed? Jonas looked at her, then at the barn. It has to be. We can't run a ranch without it. He tried to hide the worry in his voice, but Maren heard it anyway. She could tell the storm had pushed the ranch past its limits. The fences needed repair, the fields were soaked, and now the barn had given up. She remembered how she felt after the fire, the way everything around her had fallen apart at the same time. She knew this look on Jonas's face. It was the look of a man standing under a weight too heavy for his own hands. Tell me what I can do, she said softly. Jonas blinked, surprised. Maren, this is heavy work. Barns aren't simple things to fix. I know, she said. But I can help in small ways. Sometimes small things matter too. Jonas looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right. The day became busy. The men used their strength to lift heavy beams, pull away broken boards, and set aside pieces that could still be used. Maren gathered nails, sorted tools, and brought water when they needed it. She carried smaller boards, wiped dust off tools, and kept the ground clear so they would not trip. It was not big work, but it was steady, faithful work. Sutter wiped his forehead. Miss Felton, you're doing more than most ranch hands do. Maren smiled. I'm only helping. No, Tobias said kindly. You're making this feel less heavy. Jonas didn't say much, but she could feel his quiet gratitude every time he handed her a tool or took a board from her arms. His eyes had softened since the storm, as if something in him had finally loosened. Around noon, Maren brought out bread and stew. The men sat in the broken shade of the barn wall and ate with heavy hunger. Between bites, Sutter said, I tell you, having Miss Felton here feels like hope walked right onto the ranch. Maren felt her cheeks warm. Tobias nodded in agreement. Jonas did not speak, but he was watching her with an expression that made her heartbeat press softly against her ribs. After lunch, Maren wandered behind the ruined barn to gather small pieces of good wood. She crouched down, picking up clean boards, when she heard footsteps behind her. Jonas stood there, hands in his pockets, looking tired but calm. You worked hard today, he said. So did you, she answered. He nodded, then looked toward the hills. Storms break things. All kinds of things. Not just wood. Maren paused. She knew this was not just about the barn. It can be fixed, she said gently. He looked at her again. Some things take a long time. Yes, she whispered. But they still can be fixed. Jonas swallowed, emotion tightening his jaw. My wife, she loved this barn. She painted the inside door blue. Said it made the place feel friendly. Maren imagined it, the soft blue paint, the laughter of a woman who cared deeply. I'm sorry, she said softly. You must miss her very much. Jonas nodded once. Every day. There was no jealousy in Maren's heart, no fear, no confusion. She simply listened. Because she knew grief. And grief knew her. Jonas breathed out slowly. The barn will take a few weeks to repair. We'll get it done. But today, it felt easier with you here. Maren looked up at him. His eyes held truth. Not flattery. Not charm. Just truth. I'm glad, she said. I want this place to feel whole again. He gave her a small smile, one of the few smiles she had ever seen from him, and something warm and gentle passed between them. Not fast. Not loud. But real. By evening the barn looked different. Still broken but straightened. Supported. Ready to stand again. The men were tired but hopeful. Maren set supper on the table and watched their shoulders relax as they ate. Before bed she stepped out onto the porch. The sky was clear, the stars bright. A soft breeze brushed against her hair. She looked at the barn, half fixed and half ruined, and she felt something deep inside her shift. Just like the barn, she was broken in places. Just like the barn, she was still standing. And just like the barn, she felt herself slowly being put back together. Piece by piece. Day by day. Prayer by prayer. She did not see the full picture yet. But God did. She had thought her past was behind her, buried in ashes. But some things refused to stay gone. And when she saw him standing in the general store, her heart froze with fear. Maren walked into the small town with a basket of supplies Jonas had asked her to fetch. The streets were dusty and quiet, with horses tied to posts and the occasional wagon rolling by. She breathed in the dry, warm air and felt almost at peace. Almost. But then she saw him. Rutland Shore. A man she had known back east. He had once been her family's business partner, the man who had betrayed them and taken advantage of their trust. He stood by the counter of the general store, eyes sharp and smile too wide. He spotted her immediately. "Maren Felton," he said smoothly, his voice like silk over stone. "Fancy seeing you here all the way out west." Her hands tightened around the basket. "Rutland," she said carefully. "What do you want?" "Oh, nothing much," he said, stepping closer. "Just wondering why a talented woman like you would leave everything behind and end up in a dusty little ranch town." Maren swallowed hard. "I'm not interested in old business." He laughed softly, a sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "Old business has a way of finding people, doesn't it? You know, the bakery, your parents, the money owed, you could fix everything back east if you wanted." "No," she said firmly. "I don't want anything from you. I don't need anything from you. I have a life now." Rutland's smile faltered for a moment, but then he leaned closer. "Don't be so quick to close the door. You might need me yet." Maren took a step back. "No, I don't. And you should leave." Before he could answer, a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped between them. "Jonas." "You've said enough," Jonas said, his voice calm but firm. His eyes were steady on Rutland, not threatening, just strong and unwavering. Rutland hesitated. Still the quiet rancher. "I see why she came here." Jonas did not move. "Leave now or you'll answer to me." Rutland sneered but finally stepped back. "This isn't over," he said. "You'll hear from me again." Maren exhaled slowly, the tension leaving her chest in a small, shaky wave. "Thank you," she whispered to Jonas. He nodded but didn't say anything. Instead, he stayed near her as they walked out of the store, watching the street as if guarding her from anything else that might come. Once they returned to Barley Creek Ranch, Maren set the supplies down and leaned against the doorway. Her heart was still racing. "I thought I left all that behind," she said softly. Jonas placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. "The past has a way of following people," he said. "But it doesn't have to stay. You're safe here, Maren. I'll make sure of that." She looked up at him, seeing the quiet strength in his eyes. For the first time she felt fully protected, not just by walls or horses, but by someone who cared enough to stand in the storm with her. That night, she knelt beside her bed and whispered a prayer of gratitude. God had kept her safe even when the past tried to find her. He had brought her here for a reason. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she trusted him to guide every step. The ranch was quiet, the stars shining above, and Maren felt a small warmth in her heart. Her life was not perfect. It was not free from danger or sorrow. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like her story was finally her own. Sometimes God lets life break apart just a little so something better can be built. That night, a broken wagon would lead to a moment neither of them could forget. The evening air was cool and smelled of wet grass from the late afternoon rain. Maren had just finished tidying the kitchen and setting supper for the men. The sky was painted pink and orange as the sun began to sink behind the hills. She paused at the doorway, listening to the soft creak of the wind through the trees. It was peaceful, almost perfect. Then she heard the sound, horses struggling, leather creaking, a sudden thump. Her heart jumped. She ran toward the gate and saw Jonas and Sutter wrestling with a wagon that had lost a wheel. The horses were anxious, stamping the ground, tossing their heads. "Hold it steady," Jonas called, his voice strained. Maren didn't hesitate. She grabbed a rope and ran toward them. "I'll help." Together, they managed to calm the horses and set the wagon against a tree. Jonas's face was red from effort and frustration. Sutter wiped sweat from his brow and muttered something about bad luck. Maren looked at the wagon and the heavy load of supplies it carried, and then at Jonas's tired expression. Her chest ached, not from fear but from concern. "You don't have to do everything alone," she said softly. Jonas turned to her, and for a moment, the weight in his eyes seemed lighter. I forget sometimes," he said, his voice quiet. "It's been a long time since anyone helped without complaint." They walked together, side by side, leading the horses back toward the ranch. The orange sky faded into deep purple and stars began to appear. Maren kept her hands in front of her, brushing against Jonas's sleeve accidentally. He didn't pull away. "I was scared today," she admitted. "I didn't want anything to happen to you." His gaze softened and he stopped walking for a moment. "I didn't know anyone cared enough to pray," he said quietly. "I thought I'd been alone for too long." Maren's heart thumped, not from fear but from a quiet understanding. The past, the losses, the lonely nights, they had brought them both here to this broken wagon under the fading sky, where something new could begin. They continued walking, talking softly about the storm, the barn repairs, and small things about the ranch. Laughter came slowly but genuinely, a sound that felt fragile yet strong. By the time they reached the house, the night was fully dark, and the air smelled of pine and earth. Inside, Sutter and Tobias were finishing supper, and the warmth of the kitchen made Maren smile. Jonas watched her for a moment, then nodded toward the table. "You've done more than feed us," he said. "You've made this place feel like a home again." Maren looked down, her fingers brushing the edge of the table. She felt a small, quiet happiness bloom inside her, the kind that comes after long sorrow and long prayer. That night, she knelt by her bed and whispered a prayer of thanks. Not just for safety but for the way God had begun restoring her heart. For the first time she allowed herself to hope. Not just for a safe home, but for a life where laughter, love, and quiet peace could grow again. And in the dark, while the wind whispered outside, something in her told her that God's restoration was only just beginning. She had come to cook and keep the ranch alive. She did not know that opening her heart a little could change everything, hers and his. The next morning was crisp, with sunlight spilling through the windows of Barley Creek Ranch. Maren walked to the kitchen, humming softly as she set bread to rise and water to boil. The day felt lighter than it had in a long time. The storm had passed, the barn repairs were underway, and the ranch had begun to feel alive again. Jonas appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. His sleeves were rolled up, his hat in hand. He watched her for a moment without speaking. "You've been working hard," he said finally. "I don't know what we would do without you." Maren smiled gently. "I'm just doing what I can. The ranch deserves care, and so do the people who live here." He took a slow step into the room, eyes searching hers. "There's something I need to tell you." Her heart skipped. She wasn't sure what he meant, but something in his tone made her still her hands. "I've lived a long time believing I could handle everything myself," Jonas said. "I didn't want to need anyone. Not after my wife passed. But seeing you here, helping, laughing, caring, it's changed me. I realize I don't want to be alone anymore." Maren's chest tightened, and she looked down at the bread dough she was kneading. "Jonas," she whispered. He stepped closer. "I don't expect you to feel the same," he said, voice careful. I needed you to know. You've brought life back to this ranch and to me, more than you can imagine." Maren's hands shook slightly but she held onto the counter. "I've been afraid to hope," she said. "Afraid to trust anyone again. But you've shown me kindness and patience and it's helped me feel alive again." Jonas nodded slowly, relief softening his features. "I'm not asking for a promise today. I just wanted you to know how I feel." She looked up at him, seeing a man who had carried grief for years, a man who had quietly loved without speaking. Something in her heart stirred, softly, carefully. "I think," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "that God brought me here for more than cooking. He brought me here to see hope again. And maybe he's letting me trust again too." Jonas reached for her hand gently. Not pushing, not demanding, just offering. Maren placed her hand in his, and a quiet warmth spread through her chest. For a moment they stood there, holding hands across the kitchen counter, the smells of fresh bread and warm stew surrounding them. There was no rush. No urgency. Just the soft, quiet truth of two hearts slowly opening. Later that day, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Maren stepped outside and looked at the ranch. The barn repairs were progressing. The fences stood straight. The horses grazed calmly in the field. And she felt something settle deep in her heart, a sense of peace and hope she had not felt in years. God had restored more than the ranch. He had begun restoring her heart. And she realized that sometimes, the first step toward love was simply letting yourself care again. A simple celebration of the harvest would remind them that life, like the land, could grow again. And for her, it was a quiet promise that hope could bloom even after sorrow. The next morning, the sky was a clear blue, and the fields of Barley Creek Ranch shone golden in the sunlight. The wheat had ripened, and the men had spent the past few days cutting and gathering it. Maren had been busy preparing baskets of food for everyone, thinking of warm bread, roasted vegetables, and fresh pies. "Miss Felton," Sutter said as he carried a basket of apples, "you've outdone yourself this year. The men will never want to eat anything else." Tobias laughed, carrying a stack of plates. "I agree. We might just start calling you the miracle cook of Barley Creek. Maren smiled, feeling a warmth she had not felt in a long time. She was not just cooking, she was part of a family again. Part of a home. Jonas walked across the yard, his boots crunching in the dry grass. He carried a small notebook marking the harvest counts, but his eyes kept glancing at her. When she met his gaze, he gave a quiet nod and smile. It was small, but it felt full of gratitude and something else she could not yet name. As the men set up tables in the yard, Maren arranged the food. She watched as laughter and chatter filled the air. Children from nearby farms wandered by, curious and happy. Horses were tied at the post, quietly observing the scene. Everything seemed alive. Everything seemed right. Jonas approached her quietly. "This is the first time in years the ranch has felt light," he said. "Like it's meant to be a home again, not just a place to survive." Maren's chest lifted, a soft smile on her lips. "It feels like that because the work we do is shared. And because people care." Jonas nodded slowly. "And because of you. You've reminded us what it feels like to hope again." The celebration began, and Maren served warm dishes to every corner of the yard. Men and women laughed, talked, and shared stories. She noticed Jonas helping a young boy reach the top of a haystack. The sight made her heart swell. This was more than a harvest. This was life restored. As the sun dipped low behind the hills, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Jonas joined her on the porch. They watched the children run and the men carry the last baskets of food. "I never thought I'd see a day like this," Jonas said quietly. "A day where the ranch feels full again. Where hearts are full again." Maren looked at him, eyes soft. God can restore more than buildings or crops. He restores hearts too. He turned to her, the warmth in his eyes like the sun on her skin. "He must have known what I needed when he sent you here." Maren's lips curved into a gentle smile. "And he knew what I needed too." They stood together, quietly watching the ranch come alive with laughter and joy. The air was filled with the scent of bread, apples, and hay. The wind whispered through the fields, carrying with it a promise of tomorrow. Maren realized something important. Life could be rebuilt. Love could grow slowly, quietly, like seeds in the soil. And even the broken places, if cared for with patience and faith, could bloom into something strong and beautiful. She took a deep breath, feeling God's presence around her. The ranch, the people, Jonas, and even herself, they were all pieces of a puzzle being made whole again. And in the quiet of that harvest evening, she knew that her life had finally begun to feel like home. She came west to cook for Cowboys, but God had a bigger plan. He was not just restoring her ranch, he was restoring her heart, her hope, and her life. The morning air was crisp and sweet. Maren stood on the porch, looking over Barley Creek Ranch. The fields were green and golden, the barn sturdy and shining in the sunlight, and the horses grazed peacefully. She breathed in the fresh air and felt a peace she had not known in years. Jonas came up behind her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Morning," he said softly. "Good morning," she replied, turning to smile at him. He looked at her with quiet tenderness. "Maren, I've been thinking, this ranch, this life, it's more than work. It's family. It's hope. And I want to share it with you, if you'll let me." Maren felt tears prick at her eyes. She had come to the West with nothing but a small suitcase and a heavy heart. Now she had a home, friends, and a man whose heart was as kind as his hands were strong. I would like that," she whispered, her voice soft but full. Jonas smiled, a slow, genuine smile. "Good. Because I think God brought us together for more than a season. He brought us together to build a life." The sun rose higher, warming their faces as they stood side by side. Around them the ranch was alive. Sutter and Tobias were tending the last of the animals. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread and stew. The barn doors swung gently in the morning breeze. And Maren realized, with a quiet joy in her chest, that God had not just restored the ranch. He had restored her life. She knelt by the edge of the porch for a moment, whispering a prayer of thanks. "Thank you, Lord, for giving me a second chance. For bringing life back to this home, and to my heart." Jonas watched her silently, understanding the depth of her gratitude. Then he offered his hand. She took it, and together they walked down the porch steps, ready to face each day, together. The days that followed were filled with quiet joy, laughter, work, and prayer. Maren cooked, Jonas managed the ranch, and slowly they built a life full of faith, hope, and love. The past no longer held her captive. The fire, the loss, the pain, they were memories but not the end of her story. God had rewritten it. And as Maren looked out over the fields at sunset, she knew that no matter what storms might come, He would always guide her, restore her, and lead her to the life he had planned all along. Barley Creek Ranch was more than a home now. It was a place where hearts were healed, love grew slowly and faithfully, and God's grace was visible in every sunrise and every act of kindness. Maren smiled. Her life was no longer just surviving. It was living, fully. If you enjoyed Maren's journey and her story of hope, healing, and faith, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional Western stories that touch the heart. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story of love, courage, and God's guidance.